Comic books, comic books, comic books. They are the forms of literature and artwork standing side by side telling a story. While they are a thing that is still looked upon for story engines as well as forms of inspiration for both writers and artists, I've encountered many who have issues trying to start or get stuck when it comes to making comic books, and I am also a comic book maker who faces this from time to time. While my works is rather still considered indie works, as I'm an independent comic book maker, of course, I do what I can to assist some of you in this task, of which I made this video for. So let's begin and start it off. Comic books are like any other story. The issue is when people hear comic books, they automatically think superhero story. That isn't a bad thing, and don't let it slow you down. There are examples that use the superhero gimmick to its advantage to display an overwhelming story. A good example of this is the 1986 DC comic Watchmen. Its way of words, atmosphere, and astonishing foreshadowing, as well as dynamic characters, is something that wasn't seen before. It was a work of pure literature, and since its debut, it's remained a staple of inspiration. Just because it's a comic book doesn't mean it's simply for kids, which at this time, that's what all comic books were. Another staple of using the superhero gimmick is Image Comics' 1992 Spawn series. It uses the religious aspect of both heaven and hell, and it shows that both sides are willing to win with any means necessary. While Spawn is the main focus of the story, there's so much taken away from him that he needs to regain. He doesn't remember who he is at the beginning, and when he does, he actually changes and turns against those who actually condemned him to be this Spawn creature that he is. It's wonderful writing, and it shows off how well of a character that Spawn really is. To most, when it comes to developing a comic, this is what we usually do. It's a frustrating beginning, but once your concept is gathered as well as it's written and drawn out, you can go from there. Just have a keen imagination and maintain an absolute vision of focus, and you'll be off the ground shortly after. We can all do it, and anyone and everyone can be on the same page as long as we have the ability to know what we're doing and how we want to do it. This is a tough one because we all have a different taste in art. And that ideal of art is actually what sets the tone for a story in most people's cases. I'm going to be pointing at my comic book series, Kid Wars, as an example of the art. While it looks rather kid-friendly as well, its art doesn't reflect its story, since while you look at it and find it to be a child's comic book, in reality it's a story that pays attention to imperialism, child soldiers, touches child slavery, as well as it touches how children could become numb to death, as well as numb to emotion. But again, these are just touched upon because they're usually overexposed to it. The art is a standing point for representing a story, and if you want my honest opinion, art for any story is fine as long as it remains consistent. I know certain artists, especially in the 90s, in today's standards, are bashed for drawing in a certain way, but as long as it's consistent, it's perfectly fine in my book. For copyright, you may need to get it officially done by your nation's copyright department. I know some nations don't have this, and sometimes some people do make game engines and or release the game the same time as the comic book in order to maintain a shared license. There is a few issues with this, but this is a discussion for another time. And really, as the trademark payment is payment, and you'll need to pay off that trademark eventually. The issue with most is finding a copywriter. And I come face to face with those who begin to copyright their own works, usually putting it under public domain, which is not really a good idea. Some of them make up their own types of forms of copyright, as in creator-owned rights. Most people who understand and or know what image comics is have heard this term before. In fact, this is the copyright that most people usually go for. Since a creator owned copyright, which means that you own all aspects of your characters and story, as it all belongs to you. That's the kind of copyright that usually, if not any, is the one copyright to go for. And after that is, well, publishing. I'll get to that in a bit. But for copyright, that's just usually it. There are many ways for you to handle copyright and how you can get it copywritten. Though there are so many ways to handle it that I can't really give you a one answer synopsis and or breeze over it with just saying you should get it done. Since this is an international video, I'm trying to point out there are too many ways for you to handle this. So the best I can say is do it the way how your nation sets it up and follow it in that kind of way. In the world of comic books, the big publishers Marvel and DC. While they are keen for publishing, I would highly recommend Dark Horse and Image Comics, but this is all of my own opinion, a recommendation. You can choose who you like for publishing. I myself use self-publishing for my own books, specifically Lulu and Amazon, to get a message out and done. It's quicker and it gets results rather quickly, and I don't really need to waste much time with it either, since I can publish it on the spot and I don't really need to wait for a deadline from other bigger companies, i.e. Marvel and DC. For Dark Horse, I'm not really too sure how they handle publishing completely, and as for Image Comics, it's what you do and how you want to do it. Somewhat identical to self-publishing, although they are usually on your back. In conclusion, I know there are a lot of people out there who want to make comic books, and I can relate to that, as it's one of my jobs. Though, when you're becoming a newbie in this, you're just a little compared to the bigger league things. Don't be afraid to take a risk when it comes to making your story, your characters, or anything that's yours. After all, you made it, and it's up to you to decide what you want to do with it. It's completely on your own behalf. I'm not the most successful comic book maker out there, but I will say that anyone has a shot to be the next big comic book guy out there. Some of us want to make big crossover comic books or comic books based around video games we published or anything else of the sort. There is faith in everyone who can pass this event, and some of us surpass the victory road, and some of us maintain the goal completely. All we really need to do is have faith and know what we're going after. The comic book industry is slightly different from the book industry, as in where you begin in the comic books. It all depends on how sales go for you to continue this. That's the same thing in literature. The difference is the artwork and how you present your story. That's the primary difference between both of these markets. With a little novel, you can draw the title, the front page, and that's all you really need to do. As for a comic book, you need to draw it out, consuming more of your time. And that alone is something that most people really can't get through their heads, is that it takes time to draw a complete comic book. And as long as you can meet your own deadlines, I would recommend you have a long-term deadline for making a comic book where you can usually meet that deadline. If you know your speed when it comes to drawing, writing, as well as editing it, digitally speaking, I myself do my own artwork via hand drawn, is when you meet the man. Any and everyone can do it, as I've said.
We finally cut back to Star Labs, where Parasite is choking Superman like a bitch that owes him money,